Hey, I'm Di Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast. We're a platform that showcases and celebrates the strength, resilience, and achievement of women from all walks of life. In each episode, I pose questions to my guests to peel away the layers to reveal the knowledge and the experience that shapes their narrative. So if you're feeling unseen, unheard, or simply looking for inspiration, then the Power of Women podcast is a great place to join the conversation. Today's guest joins me from the United States. She grew up immersed in food and culture. She learned at a young age that if you put your heart into what you do, you will succeed. She has honed her skills in the consumer-centric marketplace of hospitality, retail, and entrepreneurship. Angela Rakis, welcome to the Power of Women podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
I love the fact that in the podcast I get to travel all around the world simply from sitting at my desk and pressing a button. It's brilliant. Love it.
It is amazing.
Where exactly are you based today?
I'm just outside of Washington, D.C., in a place called Silver Spring, Maryland.
Yeah,
For your listeners, it's just on the edge of Washington, D.C.
brilliant. So,
Mhm.
Angela, where did you actually grow up?
I actually grew up here. I grew up in Silver Spring in the state of Maryland, and I left for a bit and went to New York. Well, I went to college, went to university in North Carolina, and then I went to New York for about 15 years, and then I
Great.
came back. So I'm back in my hometown.
Wonderful. So, what's the most powerful learning you've taken away from your childhood on reflection?
I've been thinking about this question for for days now, and there's so many lessons. I think one of the biggest is that anything is possible when you're raised by immigrant parents or immigrant parent and grandparents. There's so much possibility, and I learned that from my parents. Um, but I think that's probably the biggest thing, and also that you need community or family, chosen family or birth family, but some type of people around you that are going to rally for you, that are going to put you in your place when you need it, and all of those things. And I think that carries through to my work with clients as well.
Yeah, brilliant. So, Angela, your grandparents were entrepreneurs in Washington, as I understand it, in the 1960s. When did they
Yep.
first come to the US?
My grandmother came in the early 30s, and she came through, like many immigrants of the time, through Ellis Island in New York. And she was probably in her 20s. Um, and my grandfather was born in the US to Greek parents. So he had already been here at that point. And I am not exactly sure how she ended up in Detroit, Michigan, but there were a lot of Greeks so she was, I don't know if I mentioned that. She came from Greece, to the
Mm,
US. Um, and there were a lot of Greeks in Detroit. And so that's where she ended up, and that's where she met my grandfather and married him. So they started in Detroit, and then uh, they moved to DC. He had a little market there, and then decided to bring the market here to DC, and it was called the Acropolis Food Market, which sold all those imported foods that now you can find at most grocery stores. But at the time, you couldn't find, barrel aged feta cheese. You couldn't find certain spices, and his store sold all of those. And that's
mm.
that's how they started their business here in DC. They had by that point, my mother had been born and my aunt and uncle, so they came to Washington with three kids and opened up a store,
Yeah.
and it
Well, we
became
share
like the
that in
hub of
common.
of community. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, we share that in common. Melbourne, where I am based in Australia, has a very large or very significant Greek population. In fact, there was um, a political spin put on it that we're the second largest population of Greeks outside of Athens. But I think that was more about politics than reality. But and I'm married to a my husband's of Greek Armenian heritage, so we've got a
Right.
little bit of commonality there in what goes across our table at most meals.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, and you
Yeah.
understand the personality of it.
I do. I do.
Yep.
Absolutely.
It's
So,
international. It goes everywhere.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So with that in mind, what did you learn from your grandparents, given they were entrepreneurs in their in the, pioneering era?
Yeah. Oh gosh, so many things. Because my mom would drop us off there at their store to go run errands, go shopping, and do whatever she needed. So we were there, you know, in theory working, but sweep the floor, talk to customers. And I didn't really think of it until I looked back years later, but just the whole community aspect. I think some of the old timers here would remember my grandmother's being what we would probably call just like a tough cookie. Like she was just no nonsense, but such a big heart. And anybody that came from Greece to this area, the first stop, aside from going to church, the first stop was their store. So they were really, everything seems to go back to, in my life, my career, to community and connection. And that's what
Mm,
I think of. Because I can remember the people coming in, they're buying their Greek newspaper to get news from home. It's printed in Greek. Like they're really trying to find their connection. And I think that was really important. So yes, they were selling the foods that everybody wanted. And customers were from all different walks of life. We sold a lot of Middle Eastern foods, a lot of different people. But I think that idea that there was a core place that people could go and know that they would be taken care of. I think those are probably the key things. And after we weren't super churchgoers, but somewhat. And so after church, we would leave a little bit early so we can get to my grandparents' store before the crowds, and my grandmother would have a little, snack set up for us. And so I just think that that's really what sticks with me is
yeah.
this idea. And my parents met at that store, so it
Oh,
always had just
really?
this special. Yep,
Yeah.
yeah. We could talk about that if you want, but
That's a super sense of community, isn't it? Yeah. So
it is.
do tell me about that. That's interesting. So
Yeah.
how was it that they met through the store, given that was such a central point of the Greek community in Washington?
Sure. So my mother worked in the store. She was the youngest of the three, and she worked there every day after school, and as a young adult as well. And my dad would come in. My dad he's also a Greek immigrant. We could talk about his journey here, and he was a carpenter, and he actually lived in New York, but he was in a painters union, so he would come to DC for work. He and some of his I should call them colleagues, his buddies. And again, because they were looking for the Greek community, they found the store. And so he would come in and try to impress my grandmother by passing her $100 bills and saying, "Could you cash this for me? Could you break this?" to try to impress her. She was not impressed. Like I
I
said, she was
hope he
pretty tough.
lived
And
up to this.
she, she told him he could go to the bank across the street if he needed change. She was not a
Yeah.
bank. Um, and so, and my mom really, it was, that my grandparents are very traditional. So she didn't get to do a lot of the sort of American uh, proms and dances and the high school, the things at school, but she did a lot of the Greek things, the Greek functions. So they would be in similar circles. They would see each other places. He's older than her, so that's one thing my grandmother didn't like. But he kind of worked his way in, and she liked him, and she would sometimes. I think you're talking about her being a role model. She would go to the train station here in Washington D.C. Or to the bus station, and she would call my grandmother from the payphone and say, "I'm going to New York to see Nick. Bye," and hang up. She wanted her to know where she was, but she didn't want her to, she said she could hear her screaming on the
Didn't
other
want it to
end saying,
stop her.
so she's like screaming, "You better stop. Don't you do that." And so she
Yeah.
um she said I had enough respect to tell her what I was doing, but just still did my own thing. And so that's how they began their relationship.
Yeah.
And so it did
Evolved
work
from
out. He
there.
lived up to it. They ended up liking him after after a while.
Excellent.
So
So
yeah.
you do, when we've spoken previously, Angela, you've mentioned that your mother is a role model. So clearly there's a fighting spirit there. What aspects of behavior and mentoring did your mother show you?
Oh gosh, yeah. So like I said, she had a very traditional upbringing, and my grandfather was really strict, and she wanted to go to art school. She had wanted to go to Baltimore, which is about a 45-minute drive from here. Um, to go to a particular art school. She was always into art. And then he said no. He said, your career choice at that time, right, was what, now 1960s, was to be a teacher or a secretary or a hairstylist. And she thought, okay, well, of those three, the most creative sounded like hairstylist. And so she went to cosmetology school. And it's not what she wanted to do. But she needed to work and figure out what was next. And so she did that. She was, a hairdresser for many years. She married my dad. She ended up, we had I have two older brothers. And at one point she decided, okay, maybe I should go back to work, but her license had expired. And she thought, well, I didn't like it to begin with. Why would I go back to that? So she stayed home. She was a stay-at-home mom up until I was probably, I want to say 10 years old, maybe. And it was in elementary school. Her best friend came over and said, hey, we're going to get jobs today. And my mom said, well, we don't know how to do anything. We're moms. And she said, oh, we know how to do everything. We're moms. And so her best friend, they got the typewriter out. They typed up resumes and she got a job at a bank, because at the time the bank would be open from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So she could send us off to school. She could be home when we got back. She said me and my dad was, and she said, she's like, she wasn't sure if he was really supportive or not, but he didn't say anything to the negative. And she's like, I'm doing it either way. And I feel like she's had that in her whole life to like figure
I'm
out a way
thinking
to
she
make
did too, based
so
on
she
by
so
mum,
she
by dad.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And she really I think she instilled that in all three of us. She was very much like, look, I want you all to be able to go to school. I don't care what you do after school. She said, but that education is so important. And she had started taking classes at a community college while she worked at the bank. She had started getting promoted. She went, a bank teller to a manager, and started seeing that there might be a career path. And she kept taking her classes one at a time, two at a time. And then the bank would help pay for some of your schools. So she's like, okay, this is nice. And then the community college said, you're close to having a associate's degree. You could transfer to another school and you'll get a 4-year bachelor's degree. So she transferred to a 4-year university. She continued to work and go to school, and then she and I graduated from university at the same time. So
Oh, isn't that
when I
amazing?
think of,
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. And that story always gets me a little bit weepy, because it's like she did the thing that she didn't get the chance to do way
Mm.
back then that she got to do now. So,
How old was
I mean,
she
it
when
was,
she graduated, Angela?
gosh, uh, well, if she's 80 now, and it was 1993, she was full on adult.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
she
know.
was,
I didn't do
she
the
was in
math.
her, she was in her 50s. Yeah, it's
50s. Yeah,
fantastic.
absolutely.
Yeah,
She was in her
yeah.
50s. And, when she, left the bank, she left the bank as a vice president. She went through mergers and acquisitions. I mean, she grew with that bank. Again, not what she wanted to do, but she was good at it. And when she left, people said, oh, she's retiring. And she said, no, I'm going on to my next career. And she's an artist, finally. And she'd always taken art
Ah,
classes all that time, just here and
pioneer of
there.
the third act. Yeah.
That exactly. And if you say to her that she's retired, she'll say, I'm not retired. And she is a working artist. I mean, she's got a website. Right now she has 3 shows at one time. And
Wow.
I'm
In her
blown away.
80s, yeah.
At 80 years old, she has 3 shows. She's in one that's for in DC, that's for artists over 70. I mean, and she's making these opportunities happen. And I think that the
That's
original question of
magnificent.
like, how is she a role model? Is just, I mean, that's literally modeling the behavior, right?
Oh, yeah.
I
She's
mean,
an
when being the
exemplar
only
for,
girl and the
yeah,
mhm,
yeah.
yep, being the only girl and the youngest in a Greek family, it also, and a lot of my friends went down that path of like, you can go to college, but you got to stay local. You need to get married and all these things. And my mom never pushed that. She said, you're going to go to college, like all three of you. But I got to go away to school. My dad did not want that to happen. And she
Mm,
said, I want you to go where you want to go. She gave me parameters, but I
yeah.
mean, I wanted to go to the University of Hawaii. At one point, I wanted to go to Australia. And she's like, okay, like I need to be able to get you
Tad
home.
far.
But I was really fortunate.
Yeah,
She said, do what you want to do, and then let's figure it out. So she's always been
yeah.
supportive in that way. And
I think
she's
we
also
can officially call
mhm.
your mum a trailblazer, Angela. I think that's fantastic. So good.
Definitely, definitely. At the
Yeah.
end, instead of giving my website, I should give you hers so people can buy her art. She's
Absolutely.
active. She
Yeah.
is so active. It's wild. And I mean, when I'm feeling super tired, which is like all the time, I think you cannot be that tired. Like, look at what she look at what she's up to, you know? So definitely she keeps you going. She keeps you on
Yeah,
your
that's
toes. So
brilliant. Yeah.
yeah.
I know when you talk about your story, you say you were born for small business and community. We've touched on that. I can see where that's coming from. But what do you really mean by that?
Right. Uh, we talked a little bit about my grandparents and seeing them as business owners, entrepreneurs, and people in the community that people still know to this day. When I mention who my family is, they're like, "Oh, did your grandparents have a store?" But beyond that, my father also, he came to the U.S. in mid '50s, and he came a different route. He was a merchant marine, and he had his parents had died when he was young, during the war, and so he ended up becoming a merchant marine at age 16. Like he was a
Mm,
little baby when they were gone, and so he was the youngest of five, and his two brothers had been merchant marines, so he was able to become a merchant marine. So at age 16, he traveled from Greece to South America to Japan. He's been all over the world. And I think of
mm,
16-year-olds today, I'm like, could they do it? I don't know. And so
yeah.
I feel like when he came to the States and he worked as a painter and as a carpenter, and then he opened his own business. And, I think back to like, wow, this is a person who did not get past the eighth grade. Um, he had traveled. He didn't really have family. I mean, he knew his family, but they weren't all living in the same place. And then, started a family here, started a business, and had a successful, contracting remodeling business. And so, you know, when you're in that environment, you kind of understand the amount of work that goes into it, the needs that you have, to kind of keep things going. He's also doing it while raising a family. And so I think that when I say that I was kind of born to it, I didn't acknowledge it then as much as I acknowledged it, after college and after
Mm,
working for a while.
mm.
It was like, oh, yeah, we have this in our
Well, you
DNA to
grew
to
up
do this.
immersed in it, didn't you? It was from grandparents down to parents, both your father and your mother,
Yeah.
role modeled that for you. And
Yeah. I mean, my mom was his sort of, I say, bookkeeper. She was the person that created invoices and everything. He didn't do any of that type of stuff. She did that for his
mm.
business, and he was the person that went out and did all the jobs and
And that would
hired
have
people,
been
hired other
on typewriters and putting together
a
manual
typewriter.
invoices in those days. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
yes, I think being immersed in it, and there, and I don't know what people outside the US think of Greeks, but we tend to be like restaurateurs or carpenters. I don't know where it all comes from, but that's the sort of
Well,
joke in the US.
we've got a fantastic lineage of the diaspora here who
Mhm.
have dominate the hospitality and food game.
Yeah,
And I don't mean just restaurants. I mean seriously dominate the hospitality game with multiple venues and great innovation. And
yeah,
then and we'll get to it because I know we're going to talk to about your career pursuits and sector, but the Greek community intersects in the sector, what we're going to talk about with you very much so here in
absolutely.
Australia.
Yeah,
So yeah.
it's great. Yeah.
So Angela, you worked for 10 years with one of my absolute all-time favorite uh, food retailers, Whole Food Markets, and I had the privilege of walking through that business, front and back of that business on numerous retail study tours over the decades in my executive search world.
Yeah.
And there have been plenty of Australian businesses that tried to emulate it because it was seen as the exemplar of quality, providore, and food retailing. But we had plenty of failures, unfortunately, as well, for a raft of reasons. But I don't think we had the population headcount really to sustain such a specialized model, because it sat as specialty here in Australian terms. But tell me about your experience working with Whole Foods as part of the senior leadership team, because my understanding is that was in the very early part of that business's journey.
It was the business had been around, but it was in a really big growth era when I was there. And I had been a career changer, and I had gone to culinary school and was trying to figure out what was next. And I I lived in New York City at the time, and there was one Whole Foods in New York City. Um, and it wasn't the brand it is today. But I could see myself that the position of head of marketing had, I could be around food all day, which was the thing I was really excited and passionate about, and my business background, because I'd worked in advertising prior to culinary school. So I was like, if I could merge those two things, that would be a career, that would be a job.
Mm.
And the position came, I saw the position posted and I applied, and I knew somebody there. And so I, you know, sent them my resume directly. And what I experienced there, one was that it was very much mission based, right? And a lot of companies say that. And at the time, and I can't speak to how they are as much today, but at the time, that was the big sort of lesson for all of us. It was mission based. It was, if you were operating within the core values of the company, you would be not only successful, but you'd be doing what the company needs you to be doing. And so a lot of times with some bigger corporations, right, the core values are slapped on the wall. Here's a mission
Mm.
statement over here. But we
Mm.
literally, like,
You
you could be in a
lived it.
job interview and they would ask you, which of the core values most resonates with you? Like, oh, wow. We had notebooks that had them written on there, and
Mm.
um, so one of them was team member happiness and excellence, and everybody would forget the excellence part. So a lot of times people go, team member happiness is my favorite, and then I know we're going to get to that too. And it's like, but you're also forgetting excellence. So a lot of
Mm.
leaders would say, yeah, you still have to be excellent in it. It's not going to be
Mm.
just like a happy place. So I think a lot of what I learned was the mission based, staying connected to your mission. Like when you're veering off the mission and the values, that's when things would kind of go awry, and you could just almost sense it. You just could feel it. If somebody was working on a project, you're like, it feels a little off, and we would review.
Mm.
And I think that really was important in that part of my career, because I'd worked in advertising, which is a little bit more cutthroat, a little less. Um, you lose your account, you lose your job. And Whole Foods
Yeah.
was not necessarily that type of place. It was really, I found at that time too, if you weren't great at the job you had, okay, but you bring this value here, and I think this would be a better spot for you. I really felt that, as I was growing in the company, I always felt like I could go to one of my leaders and say, I don't know, I think I've done this job now, or this job's getting a little bit like tedious. Is there something else? And if you were willing to do that, you could find interesting projects to work on. So
Mm.
that's what I really loved about it. And I felt like I was getting like a PhD in leadership, because they very much valued being a good leader, meaning that you have empathy for your team, that you're advocating for them, you're holding them accountable. All of those things were really important. And
Mm.
so you might not be I don't know, the best seafood person in the store, but you know, you're a great leader. You have promoted other people to leadership roles. You've done all these things. And so I think that was really a big lesson in terms of
Mm.
leadership and what it takes to be a really empathetic leader. And I'm not saying I didn't have some leaders or coworkers that you were just like, ooh, ouch, because
Mm.
they've come from, restaurant kitchens. And so they're a little bit rough around the edges, but that was never a reason to kind of just decide, okay, they're not good. I mean, it was always, okay, how can we help this person? They're part of our team.
Mm.
And at Whole Foods at the time, when you interviewed for a job, so I interviewed in a room with, I think there were about 15 people in the room with me. There were other people on video. This is well before Zoom. So it was just what they
Wow.
call the teleconference or whatever they called it then.
Mm.
And it was people that would report to you, people that were at your level. people that were a higher level. So it was everyone. And so everyone
360.
had and everyone had a stake in you doing well, because if they voted you in, they,
Mm.
and you went through this whole process, they really wanted you to succeed. So if you were struggling, they would want people would want to come to your aid and say, okay, let's help you
That'd be great
move
coming
forward.
into the business too, because you're getting an insight to people at all levels and all functions. So you're getting to assess them at the same time as
Hmm.
they're getting to assess you, which I think is something that lacks in so many interview processes where people go and are interviewed for a role, they meet one, maybe two people,
Hmm.
and they make their assumptions that it's the right destination for them on the basis of two interactions. And I've always been a huge advocate that there needs to be due diligence done both ways
Sure.
when engaging and seeking a role. And you don't want surprises going in and only really learning about the organization on day one. I want to know about the organization before I sign on the dotted line.
I agree 100%. And I think that's a big part of it too, and I tell this to students that I work with, that, you're interviewing them too. You're making sure that this is a place that you're going to be comfortable, 40, at least in the US, should be 40 hours a week, but it's often 50 or 60. That you're going to be spending a lot of
Yeah.
time there, and
Mm.
what is it like? And I also like that, you know, Whole Foods is like a relatively flat organization in terms of like hierarchy. They didn't like anybody to have the title of director. People were coordinators, and they're really specific about that. But that it wasn't only the decision of the senior most person in the room.
Mm.
It was a vote, and and sure, if there was a discussion, or that needed to happen, the senior person did get to make the final decision. But typically, everyone has discussed at the beginning, what type of question do you want to ask, what's most important for you for this candidate, what does this role mean to you in your job, and that way everyone's kind of coming at it from their perspective, versus I heard that this person blah blah blah, and it's like, no, from your perspective, what do you need to know about this to make to
Mm.
make the right choice? And so I think that also helped kind of even it out a little bit, so it wasn't always
Mm.
just one person makes the ultimate decision. So
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to come back to a point that or a phrase that you used earlier, and it's interesting. I had a discussion with another senior retail leader here in Australia only the other day. Empathy. It seems to be a leadership quality, leading with empathy, that has been pushed to the background. Whether COVID really amplified that, but it doesn't seem to be as prevalent as a leadership quality as perhaps it was 20 years ago.
yeah, and I don't know if it's the timing or if it's the way a company decides to a approach their business. I don't know specifically, but yeah, I mean, I think of other companies I've worked for, and it didn't come up as much. So
Mm.
I don't know. I do think that it's something that, we've talked. I think in recent years people talk about how empathy and vulnerability and these things that were, you know, weaknesses, that they're actually strengths. And I think
Strengths.
I
Mm.
think that was a big secret sauce of Whole Foods, was that, I mean, the CEO had written a book on conscious leadership, and he had a lot of us go through these sort of conscious leadership programs, and it was just kind of a different way of looking at work, right? And we
Mm.
did an exercise at one of these that was, I mean, it was something, I don't know, like thinking of the end of your life and who's there and that type of exercise, which I think a lot of us have probably read about or seen,
Mm.
but we are doing it at work, and it's like, oh, this is like, I'm working too much. I mean, because I worked a lot at Whole Foods, and I was traveling a lot, and it was
Mm. It's the
very
nature of
busy
retail,
job.
I think. It's
Nature,
long
nature
hours.
of, yep, long hours, or holidays are coming. There's almost always a holiday, and they're always around food, and so it was very busy, very high stress.
Mm.
So I'm not saying that it was like a walk in the park, but
Yeah.
I didn't acknowledge that as much because I was enjoying it, right? I liked
Yeah.
the job, and until I slowed down and realized, well, I need to I need to take a break. This is a
Mm.
lot. But yeah, I think there's something about letting people be, um, I don't know, sensitive or empathetic. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable, right? It's not
No,
all like
no,
sunshine
no,
and
no.
roses. It's really have people feeling safe that they can come forward and say, "Hey, I have an issue with this," or "This
Mm.
isn't, this." I tried. I had I had projects that failed, and I remember my boss saying, "All right, tell me, like, how did this how did this all come about, right?" And we're kind of going through it, and I was like, "Well, I really thought, customers would love this, and and it just kind of was a dud." And once we talked it through, she's going to be like, okay, so that's a learning, right? Like, I didn't put
Mm.
the company out of business. We didn't lose millions and millions of dollars. It wasn't that. It just was it. We put a lot of effort into something that just didn't go anywhere.
Mm.
And so yeah, I never felt like I was being like attacked for it, or put in a little cubby hole because I was,
Mm.
you
They're
messed that up. Now you got to
encouraging
stay there.
ideas. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Mm.
again, there are some leaders that may have been better at that than others. But you kind of figured where your spot was. And that's what I liked about it. And I really enjoy my job had a lot of connection with the small business owners, right? So the people who just got a product into Whole Foods, which is a big deal. And that can
Mm.
make or break a business. It's there's a lot of entrepreneurs who think, oh, that's it. I'm going to get my product in Whole Foods. And that's actually when the work starts. That's when the
Mm.
money is flowing out the door, not really flowing in. And so
Yeah.
my team was able to kind of work with some of these smaller businesses and figure out what can we do to help amplify your message and what you're doing. And that was really the
Mm.
most fun part of the job, was that
Yeah.
you're working with other small businesses to help them grow.
That would have really tapped into your upbringing. You would have loved that.
Or when we
Mm.
would have, Greek products, and it would be like such a big deal, and it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, oh, we have this all so many olive oils from Greece. This is amazing. And I would think, like, my grandfather would be like, whoa, I could only get two, and now they've got, so many. So yeah, it really was
Yeah.
a fun place
Yeah.
to learn about food. And I traveled, to other parts of the world, helping teams tell the story of the products that they were sourcing, which was really pretty fun.
Mm. Mm. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So, coming
Mhm.
up, we're going to have a greater conversation about the Great Resignation and talk about what it takes to succeed in business. So, Angela, 2020, 2021 was a defining period where many realized that they didn't love what they do. And in fact, people were quitting their jobs or are quitting their jobs at record levels. The COVID-19 pandemic has led more and more people to reevaluate what they want from a job and in fact what they want from life. And the stats say that the Great Resignation resulted in a record 80 million Americans quitting their jobs from 2020 to 2023. Then came the entrepreneur exodus and the startups that were launched by people who used to work in the Fortune 500. So there's been an uptick in the entrepreneurial world. What impacts are you seeing in the marketplace as a result of the Great Resignation?
I, I think what you said just a moment ago, one of those stats about increased entrepreneurship, I do see more people wanting to figure out what could they do on their own. I think some of it began with a little bit of the gig economy and those side hustles and side businesses. And I think some people realized at that time, you know, instead of being an Uber driver doing these sort of side hustles, like, maybe this can become my actual job, whatever it is. So I think people definitely saw the opportunity that maybe they had some kind of uh, project idea that they could create, or that the skills that they had gotten for all these years of their corporate work could be applied to something else. So I do think people are looking at that. Um, One of the things, though, is that there's also a lot of the sort of the venture capitalists and people who invest in businesses. I think trying to find ways to, uh, you know, disrupt and shake things up. And I think they bring a little bit more of that kind of corporate energy, which is honestly a bit of a drain. Like, it's like people constantly trying, right? It's like, well, I
Mm,
need some money for my venture, but I have to like jump through 20 hoops. How different is that than having a corporate job where I have to jump through 20 hoops to,
mm,
get promoted or get a raise or what have you. So I've seen a lot of that too. And it kind of, it's like I don't know, a love hate. I'm like, yeah, if some of my clients who are entrepreneurs could get some of that capital, because I do think it's harder for women to get, then
mm.
great, go for it. But it's not, it's not equitable. It's not even. And that kind of makes me a little bit crazy. It's like you have all this, you're sitting on this pot of money and you're being so selective because you want your money back. Now you're being selective because you're kind of being a bit of a, I'm just going to go ahead and say, like, kind of a jerk. You're just being kind of a bro with money. And it makes me kind
Mm,
of nuts. So
mm.
I have seen a lot of that because I've seen people, businesses start and it's like the marketing is amazing, the branding is amazing, and oh, this is awesome, and we're going to bring in all these little vendors and support them. And it's like, well, we were just saying how hard retail is. Well, profit wasn't where it needed to be as fast as it needed to be, and now we're just going to close it. And it's like,
Mm.
how about all the vendors? How about all the employees? How about everybody who's put their heart and soul into it? And now it's like, oh, we
And
didn't we didn't get our money back.
we've got that happening in the theme of tough economic environment and high
Mhm.
interest rates here, where the amount of small businesses going to the wall is unfortunately on the rise.
Yep. Yep,
Mm.
absolutely. So I don't know. I mean, I do think that a lot of people thought through what their skills were, they had more, I hate to call it more time, but a little bit more reflection time to say, well,
Oh,
what are my skills?
absolutely.
Or
Yeah. Mm.
what are the things that I'm able to do? And, in my business, I had been in mostly retail, hospitality, consumer goods, but during the pandemic, other businesses reached out to me because small businesses universally have similar issues. And so I it was kind of startling. I was like, oh, you are a small business. And I didn't think of it. Was a one in particular always comes to mind is a therapist who had she had two offices. She had 10, 15 employees. Like that's you have a responsibility to this company, even though it's different. So I think people were starting to realize, like, what else am I going to do? And I've seen that too with some, when we talked, I think the big word was pivot. All these businesses were pivoting.
Mm.
um, I think we saw a
Mm.
lot of creativity, and I think that stuck with people. The other
Mm.
thing is, this idea that I'm going to call it 9 to 5 corporate job, whatever you want to call it, is secure. That was sort of a thought, and I think people still feel like, well, I have to go get a real job. I need security. I need the security of the paycheck. But the thing is, it's not really necessarily secure, right?
Secure.
Because you
Mm.
can be terminated at any time. Business can shift, and your role, shifts out. And so I think that we've been fed that it is secure. It's not really secure. I mean,
Mm.
it's secure for some time, but you don't have any
Mm.
control over that. So
Mm.
just knowing, and because I'm not a big, like, everyone should quit their jobs. It's like, either, you're going to stay in it and do it and put up some kind of boundaries around yourself of how you want to do it. Um, because it's not going to be easier to be an entrepreneur. It's just going to be a different level of
Different pressure. Mm.
different
Mm.
pressure, different stresses.
Mm. But
Yeah.
I do think the fact that the world slowed down, people had time to think, and I don't think, we're so caught up in the day to day doing what we do that just becomes this self-perpetuating um, cycle of activity. But to have the time to stop and think. And I think people realized they didn't like a lot of things. A lot of people found they didn't like each other. I mean, there was all sorts
Hmm.
of reevaluation of one's world. So it's no great surprise. But to your point, transferring your pressure point from being an employee to an employer or running your own business doesn't necessarily change how much pressure you're under. It's just different pressure points.
Just different pressure points.
Mm,
Absolutely.
mm,
Yeah. And and I think sometimes we don't want to slow down and reflect, because that there's a vulnerable thing to do, is stopping and thinking it through. And I was, put up with people with like addictions. My addiction was to be not overwhelmed, but busy. I loved being busy, 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 because I didn't have to slow down to think through, like, or
mm,
feel what's really happening. So it's not that much different than, substance abuse. It's My
No,
substance
no.
was busyness. And that's what oh, you need me to fly to wherever? Okay, I'll do it.
Mm.
And what kind of, I think, woke me up a little bit was, um, we were the healthiest supermarket in America, was one of our lines. And I had gained 50 pounds. I don't know what that converts to, but 50 pounds just in the 10 years, because I was on the road. I was
All
eating a
about the
lot.
work
We
and
were
not about you. Mm.
totally. And that was, one of the moments where I was just like, oof, gosh,
Mm.
and just things just started coming up where I was like, I am really, and built my whole identity around it too. It's like, this is what
Around
I
your
do.
work. Mm.
And I work and I work and I'm reliable and I'm this and I'm that. And it was just like, ooh,
Mm.
once I kind of started, I don't know, guys, working on myself, or, once the job wasn't there anymore, it was like, oh, yeah, you need to slow it down a second and see what's happening. And it took, a lot of work to kind of deprogram that thinking.
Mm. Mm. And you know from
So,
personal experience that the retail and hospitality sectors are extremely demanding. The hours are just so long, particularly on the hospitality side, even more so than retail. And the competition and demands of being on the front line dealing with the consumer is really taxing. I mean, the coalface of frontline, I think, is one of the hardest workplaces to be. What lessons can be learned for future workforce management and engagement from what we've been through?
oh man, so many. Where do I start? I think one of them is, for employers, is that idea that, yeah, I don't think this next generation of workers is going to tolerate just, you know, being treated like a number, a cog in the wheel. I think they just, there was some, I don't remember the numbers, but some report about, I don't know if it was, must have been the millennial or the Gen Z, that they switch jobs more, and
Mm.
we've always been told, better stay in that job for 2 years because you need the track record. And they're just like, if I'm not being treated properly, if I'm not respected, if I have to constantly jump through hoops, I'm not staying. And
Mm.
they are
Yeah.
not unapologetic about it. And I think there's something kind of nice. I would probably have hated it as a boss. I'd have been like,
I was about to
now what?
say, yeah, it
But
depends which side of the
depends on which
line
side of it.
you're
But
on. Mm.
I think
Mm.
if employers start just really be thoughtful and creative with your team and let them speak and let them, the ideas might not be great, but the ideas can be heard and they can be surfaced, and that's how we come up with something new. I feel like it's going to be on the employer side, to really figure out how they want to treat their team. I had coffee this last week with somebody who was, this is like his first job out of college, been there a couple of years, and um, he was interesting because he said, they are really great about, they have however many days a week to be in the office. I think it was like 2 days. And in the summer, Fridays, always remote. Um, August, 100% remote work for everybody if they want it. So they're looking at these ways that people
They've
want to
made it
work. And he said,
seasonal rather than just days of the week. That's an interesting
just
approach.
I
Mm.
thought that was really interesting. And also he said that, you know, because that's the group of college graduates, everyone's like, well, they don't want to come to the office. And what are we going to do? And he's like, for him, he said, I like going to the office. He said, I can see what the benefit is. But he's like, but I like the option of not going to the office, and a lot of
Mm.
us didn't have that option. So I
There's
think
that
that
point. None of us like being told what to do.
we just
But if
don't.
you but if you have a choice, you just might find the right thing to do merely
Mhm.
by having the choice of navigating your own way there.
Right, right. Or
Mm.
having these sort of hard, fast rules. This is how we do
Mm.
it. And it's like, okay, that's fine. You have the choice to run your business the way you want. But if you're seeing a pattern of people are leaving,
Mm.
there might be something going on here within your organization, and just really looking at. And I think, valuing really good leaders versus, again, we could teach some of the technical skills. You can teach people these other things, but having that ability to connect with people, to make them feel safe and heard, it's not that easy. But if you have
Mm.
people like that in your organization, I think it really, really helps. I
Yeah.
really do. So, and maybe I'm
So
naive. I don't know, but that's what I think. I think if you have the right
no, I
the
think
right
you've got
leaders
enough
and the right
lived
culture.
experience to draw on to put your point forward. So, Angela, the
Thanks.
number of female entrepreneurs is increasing around the world, which is fantastic. And in the US, women started 49% of new businesses in 2021, up from 28% in 2019, according to a recent study. And similarly, in Australia, women account for around one third of Australia's small business owners. You said that you learnt from a young age that if you put your heart into what you do, you will succeed. Is heart enough?
Oh, heart is the starting point, I think. And it goes back to what I said earlier about your purpose, your mission, values, whatever you want to call them. If you have that really clear, that's a great starting point. And it's always a place you can go back to. When you're feeling like things are going kind of off the rails, the heart and the like just the purpose is where it comes back to. So I don't think it's enough. I mean, I guess it could be enough, but I think it's like the starting point, the foundation that you build on. I often have clients who are like, well, I don't really know. I don't really know. And it's like they do, but they just have, again,
Mm,
slow down. Let's take a minute and let's figure out, why did you start this business 10 years ago, 5 years ago? What's kind of gotten off track? And so I think that heart is it's a good place to start. It really,
it's the foundation.
yeah, it's like your core. Like what are you doing? I had one of my very first clients, and one of the things I loved about her is every time there's opportunities that come up and we're so excited, we would kind of stop and be like, it's not really it's not really the mission of the company. It's kind of cool to do, but we're not going to do it
Yeah.
because it didn't really
Mm,
meet it. And sometimes we sort of laugh, or she got her product into a bunch of Target stores and realized that she wasn't ready for it because her suppliers weren't ready. She wasn't ready. And
mm,
again, like we think that that's the dream, that thing at the end, when really that wasn't the dream. The dream was for her to support these women in Africa who um, who harvest shea butter, and then she'd give them
oh, wow.
a fair salary for their for the
Fair
shea
trade.
butter. She brings it to the US. She makes her products. She's a small business owner. That was the thing. We would always kind of be like, well, how does this benefit the women there, and how does it benefit the women here? It actually doesn't. So we need to kind of pull back and figure out what we're doing. So I think that's a you know that's where the heart comes in. Where it's just
Mm,
like put your heart into it. Know that you are on the right path, and keep going. I think the other thing is like it's tiny little steps. I have so many
mm,
people I work with that think it's like, okay, I'm going from here to there. It's like you're taking a million little steps as a business owner to get to that spot. And it's
mm.
okay if today was a day that all you did was your invoices. It's okay if today all you did was this, because there's going to be a million of those days in between.
Mm. So, putting on your consulting hat as the founder of Favorite Daughter, what advice would you have for aspiring female entrepreneurs?
My first advice, gosh, is I think what I just said, don't rush it.
Mm,
Don't. I mean, again, it is so hard for us to slow down. It's hard for me to slow down. Um, don't rush it. It is, you're there for the long haul. And when you feel those little, whatever it is, imposter syndrome, the fears, those things, they're going to pop up. They're going to pop up when things are going awesome, just to kind of wobble you down a little bit. And just remember that that's a moment in time. It's a moment in time. And I think that that's really, when you're running a business, it's that. I also think, and I was at a presentation where a woman said, as you're whatever moving up your business ladder, whatever you want to call it, to look back to see what other woman is behind you that needs a hand and pull her forward too. And I think
mm,
that, to me, that's part of community and connection. And if
absolutely. Women
you don't
supporting
have to,
women. Can't shout it
you don't
loudly enough.
you can't shout out, and you don't have to do it alone. Like there's a
Mm,
whole bunch of us out here that want to help. There's, whether you want to build a networking group, whether you want to build just a group of, I mean, I went to a thing today of a woman she's like, I'm back in town, having lived elsewhere. Let me buy you a cup of coffee. And she just sent it out, and it was in my neighborhood. And I was like, well, of course I'm going to go have coffee with them,
mm,
because how great is that she just took that step and said, I'm back. This is what I'm doing. Love to have coffee with you. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, if people don't show up, that's okay. You know,
It's
it,
brilliant.
someone's going to show up. So really, I think was that advice? I think that was good.
Yeah, no, it is advice. So,
Yeah.
Angela, how does somebody find your business, Favorite Daughter?
Yes, favorite daughter. Make sure you put the LLC because there's apparently a t-shirt brand. I hope they're not trying to come after me, but I did get the LLC. So I'm a favorite daughter LLC. So my website is favoritedaughternllc.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Angela Rakis, Rakis. My business has a LinkedIn page. My business has a Facebook page, and I'm a big fan of Instagram. So you can find me there, but it's just Ange Rakis, ANGRAKIS, because why not? I mix a little business and a little fun. You'll see a lot of food
Ah, there you
there, a lot of
go.
food photography, a lot of travel, a lot of, and then I'll throw in some business tips and tricks as I go along. So
Wonderful.
that's where I am.
Sounds like you're
Yep.
enjoying social more than me. I think it's the biggest time thief I've ever encountered in my life.
It can be, it can be. I try to be real strategic about it and
Yeah,
smart and just enjoy it for what it is versus like I
make
must
it a
post five
chore.
times a day.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah. I'm processing it, Angela. I'll take it. I might have a conversation with you offline as
I was
to
just gonna.
that's probably my one stressor in life at the moment. Everything else I absolutely love, but I find social is quite something. So
It
yeah,
is quite something.
yeah,
It's not the
yeah.
only tool. That's the only thing I'll tell everybody is it's not the only tool.
It's
There's
not
a
the only
million
tool.
ways to get the
Mm,
message out. So let's find the right one.
yeah, great. So
Awesome.
with that, I got to put a shout out, which is going to be all about socials. There's the irony in that. But thank you so much for joining me today. I know it's evening your time, Angela, in from Washington, and great to hear your take on the female journey and the entrepreneurial journey. And there's such commonality around the world with the stress points and what's going on. And it really is a small world. But thank you very much. And I'll put in the show notes if you're looking to track Angela as well, Angela with Favorite Daughter LLC. And also, if you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please be sure to share it with somebody. And dare I say it, you can find us on the socials too. My favorite social is LinkedIn. That's my world, my business world that I know only too well. But you can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. And you can also jump on to the powerofwomen.com.au website and have a conversation directly with me. If there's a episode that you're interested in looking up, they're all catalogued there on the podcast page. Or if there's a topic or a guest that you would suggest that I explore, jump on to the Connect page and liaise with me directly and let me know. Until next time.